Hi folks, I thought I'd rare opportunity come out on my own today to do this particular video, so I haven't got any distractions. The dogs have been out for a long walk this morning. Well, not long walk, but they were out for over an hour this morning, so they're at home sleeping. And I kind of just wanted, maybe it's because I feel kind of safe here, I don't know, while I'm kind of relating the next bit of my story, but this is where I'm sitting today. I've had to walk a little bit to get here, but I tried to get down sort of on the beach back up that way, and the steps were all sort of underwater because the tide is either in or on its way out, I guess. So there was no sort of peace. There's a lot of people out today, as you can imagine, because it's a nice day. And I'm sitting on some rocks, sort of tucked down out of the wind. It's not particularly cold today. It's lovely actually. Look at the beautiful view over there. That over there is another island in itself, and it's a glorious day, as I say. There's a little bit of a wind, bit rough. Remember, I used to bring Fi over to this bit, and it was hilarious because there used to be loads of rabbits over here. And I remember one day his eyesight wasn't brilliant because he had to have stuff in his eyes. And I remember we were over here one day, and must have been about, I don't know, 3 or 4 rabbits. And they saw him, and they kind of froze and went down on the ground as if to say, "Oi, there's a dog coming. Just let's just wait till it passes," kind of thing. And poor Fi, bless him, didn't see any of them. It was hilarious. So yeah. Anyway, don't want to take too long on this particular bit of my story, but let's pick up from my mum went into hospital to have me, obviously, and when she went into hospital, she had to put my brother, who was 5 years old, with one of the neighbours because my father was so violent and had been so violent and horrible to my brother that she was in fear that something dreadful would happen. So he was put with a neighbour, as I say, and particular neighbours that he was put with will come up in another bit of my story. So I came home, and my older brothers and sisters used to come and visit. There was lots of music, and my brothers were into music, and they were always, there was always music in the house. There was always animals in the house. We had cats. I remember we had a beautiful tortoiseshell cat, and she was always having babies, bless her. And of course, back in those days, you didn't go and spay and neuter your cat. And what a lot of families did, and it's not right, obviously, but there were several times, when our cat would have babies, and we would keep one or two, and several times I would go with my father down to the local gravel pits that were near where we lived. We lived in a little village in the Cotswolds, and he would put the kittens in a carrier bag and dispose of them in the gravel pits. And absolutely horrific. You wouldn't dream of doing that now, but back in the day it was kind of the thing that happened. And so yeah, we always had dogs. We had a Labrador, I believe. We had a Labrador Retriever. We had Jack Russell. Very tragically, I can remember one day the dog got run over on the road, and there was a particular song playing on the radio at the time. I've never forgot it. You guys will know it. It was that song Quanta La Mera. Both me and my brother now can't ever forget that song, because it obviously affected me and probably all of us when it happened. But days we used to go down to the local gravel pits and play, and I used to trawl after my brother. Now, he was 5 when I came into the world, and he was severely damaged. There's no two ways about it. I mean, by the time he was 5, he'd been beaten numerous times by my father, severely beaten. And I think the issue, apart from the alcohol and the fact my father drank, all day, every day, plus my mother, was, I don't think my father ever really believed that, my brother was his. There was always that kind of doubt in his mind, I guess, that, it wasn't his son. It could have been, the son of my mum's second husband, second marriage. But that, that's not true. He definitely is my full brother, and he's definitely my dad's son. But at about the age of 3, so I'm born, I come home, there's chaos. My brother's been beaten probably every day of his life. My mother used to say he used to rip the electrics out. We'd have wires hanging, there'd be no electric. And he used to cordon off part of the living room, and put a sign up saying, Frank's side, do not cross. And my mum would come down in the morning to go and make a cup of tea or whatever, and she'd have to obviously cross his side, and of course he would go ballistic, and it was just ridiculous. I mean, it really was ridiculous, but as you can imagine, it was brutal. I mean, my mother was getting beaten every day. My brother was getting beaten every day. My elder brothers and sisters, I mean, they came to visit us, as I say, but they didn't want to be there. Who would? Nobody wanted to come and visit us, really. We were the family from hell. So, at about the age of 3, my eldest brother, I think he's about 19 years older than me, he decided he was going to go to Australia and go and, work out in Australia. This was before he got married. And so, we were quite close. On the photographs of him, holding me in his arms, and there's me with my squint, but there's these lovely pictures of him you know, and he said he adored me, you know, he adored me, and I was his little sister. So he obviously left to go to Australia, and I think that must have had a devastating effect on me, because the one thing, I mean, obviously I didn't see him that often, but he was the one person that would sort of pick me up and hold me in his arms and show me some kind of affection. Um, you know, there was no affection. There was no there was no physical affection. There was no hugs. There was no, oh darling, come here, let me give you a cuddle, either from my father or my mother. So, as you can imagine, if I had someone who was, you know, holding me in his arms and making me feel, even for a few precious moments, that, you know, I was somebody and somebody cared about me, then, you know, when he left for Australia, I think it must have had quite a devastating effect on me. I think, um, even though, you know, I can't physically remember it, but that I can kind of connect with the feelings that obviously, you know, I had at that time. So the good news is that my brother didn't stay in Australia for too long. He didn't decide to stay out there, so he returned, and then you know, he got married and lived in a town not too far away from us. Um, so life at home, you know, was not good. Let's be brutally honest. It was horrific. I couldn't sleep at night. My mum said I would never go to bed. I would scream because I was absolutely terrified. I had this terrible, terrible fear. Um, and this is where I believe kind of the supernatural came in, or, you know, was evident in my life. Uh, One of my earliest memories, probably age 3 or 4, was I woke up and went to the bathroom in the early hours of the morning, and I can remember it to this day. It's as vivid today as it was then. Um, and as I walked across the landing to the bathroom, there was this, what I can only describe as what looked like a fox, a fox, staring at me in the middle of the landing. Now, you know, it wasn't one of our cats, it wasn't the dog, it wasn't, you know, wasn't my brother dressed up in a stupid costume. It was there, and then it just disappeared. But the thing that I remember was his glowing red eyes just boring into me, and the feeling that I had of just absolute terror. I mean, I suffered from fear right up until way past I was, you know, in my middle 20s. It was something that, you know, it's my earliest memory. And it's not surprising considering, you know, what was going on. And you know, my brother, obviously, because of what he'd experienced at the hands of Dad, and he, you know, I can only say it as it was. He was cruel to me. I forgive him, and I understand why. But you know, he wasn't nice. I mean, I used to follow him around with his friends. You know, they'd go up to the football field, and I'd say, "Oh, can I come?" He didn't want me anywhere with him, but he'd say, "Yeah, but you know, if anybody asks, you're not my sister." and you got to walk 10 paces behind me. And so, of course, obviously it hurt, but I did it because I just wanted to spend time with him. I didn't want to stay at home. It was horrible at home. So I used to, follow him around, and he wasn't particularly kind to me. Um, he used to punch me in the arms and say, if you don't do this, then I'll tell mum, and usual sort of sibling stuff. But there was an added layer of just nastiness, and it was because he was obviously severely disturbed, and he'd sort of obviously had issues at school, and so there were psychiatric reports done on him, and which I read actually, and the psychiatrist that did an assessment on him ended up being the same psychiatrist that had to do an assessment on me. And bear in mind, when he was doing this assessment on my brother, he was aware that I was, I'd been born into the same situation. And on the report, he said that to have one alcoholic parent, a child, doesn't have much hope. But to have two, there's really no hope. And the report that he'd done on my brother was that my brother was severely emotionally damaged, disturbed. And they knew obviously what was going on. My mum had spoken to agencies and discussed what was going on, stuff. So my brother got sent. He was going to the local primary school, and as I was, it was a little village primary school. It was great, but he ended up going away to a residential school. But my mum ended up removing him because she went on a visit, and the kids were all out of control. She suddenly realised, obviously it wasn't the right place for my brother, so she removed him. He came back home. And then when he was about 11, I think it was, so I would have been 6, he was... they had grants back in those days for kids that, needed help, and they had grants for you to go away to boarding school and things like that. And all the professionals felt that it would be much better for him if he was to go to a normal school, i.e. a boarding school, so he obviously would be away from the family, be away from the trauma that was going on at home. And he got a grant, and he went to a very famous boarding school in a town. It was about 20 miles away from where we were living. And so he was a boarder. He used to come back, home, obviously during the holidays. And so, sort of from the age of 6, I was living at home with my mum and dad, on my own, so to speak. Which you could say was kind of a blessing, because at least I didn't have, my brother there as well, bullying me. But it wasn't, it was pretty horrific. When I was about 5, I remember this vividly too. My dad decided that it would be a good idea to make me smoke a cigarette. So he came up behind me in the garden, and he made me, inhale on this cigarette. And he used to smoke 60 fags a day, like my mother. Number six. I mean, they banned them now. They were so lethal. Uh, and he made me inhale on this cigarette. And of course, obviously, I'm choking and spluttering, and I'm only 5. And he, in his mind, it was, well, if I do this, then she, it will put her off smoking, and she won't smoke. Obviously, that didn't work because I did end up smoking. But yeah, so that was another early memory that I remember. As I say, I did write down just a few notes because so all this was going on. My dad was drinking. He'd go to the pub. He used to drink drive. I mean, he crashed the car numerous times, even before I came along, and then after, because I experienced a crash as well. But he used to go to the pub, and then he'd come home and he'd drink whiskey. And my mum used to drink sherry. That was her favourite tipple. So obviously things just got worse and worse and worse, and I think obviously the worst thing for me was the emotional neglect. And then obviously my dad would hit my mum, and my mum would just he'd punch her and she'd fall down on the floor. And I used to think, why didn't you get up and just, cave his head in, woman? But she didn't. She was so weak. That's how I perceived her, as being so weak, because she would just say, "Don't, Frank," and then he'd smack her again. And I would say, I mean, when he was hitting my brother, I would. I was 5 years younger than my brother, but I would say, "Don't, Dad," and I would try to defend my brother. And most of the time, this shows how emotionally disturbed my brother must have been, because most of the time when my father hit him, he just used to laugh. He used to laugh his head off, which is another sign that he obviously was disturbed. But my dad would hit my mum, and I tell my dad to stop it, and then my dad would obviously come and hit me. But when my dad used to hit me, it was like there was something in him that kind of held himself back. I mean, he could hit you good, but there was something in him that kind of held himself back. It was almost like he couldn't go the full hog with me physically that he could with my brother. And I think that's because he knew without a shadow of a doubt that I was his daughter. And I think, so, this went on, and this was a daily thing. There wasn't ever a day. I just want to make you aware of this. There wasn't a single day until the day my father died that he wasn't drunk and violent. And after he died, because I'd lived with that for 13 years, every day, constantly, when he died and it stopped happening, apart from the fact that my mother was still drinking, but she wasn't violent. After he died, you'd still dread him coming through the door back from the pub, and you knew it was going to start, and it classic symptoms of PTSD, I guess. And that. So when I was about the age 7, my mum left my dad. I mean, I think there were several times that she used to kind of drag me to my eldest brother's, and we'd stay there for the odd night or so. But she decided, obviously. I mean, the police used to be called, and back in those days there was no domestic violence laws like there is now. Police couldn't get involved in marital disputes, and but the police would be called, and all they would say to my mum is, why don't you leave him? Take the kids and go. And her response was always, but I love him. I love him. No, she was dependent upon him. It was a toxic relationship for the pair of them, but it was because she was dependent upon him. She was weak. She couldn't stand on her own 2 feet in that respect. And I kind of don't like that bit, because it's similar in me. I think of myself as very weak as regards making decisions, or So yeah, that was harsh. And obviously, when Dad was beating her up, when he was hitting us, I don't ever remember her, defending us, or saying, really trying to defend us. She'd just sit there, and then she'd make excuses and say, oh, well, your father's like this, So, obviously my brother was at school, and he came over the holidays. So anyway, she took me, and we moved without my father to another village, and there were just 2 cottages, in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by fields, and it's lush. It's a beautiful village in the Cotswolds, and obviously I had to change schools, because I've been going to one primary school, so obviously I had to then go to this other village primary school, and it was so small, the school, that they had 2 classes, that was it. And so we moved again, and obviously my brother came home, from school in the holidays, and we had a lovely back garden at this place, I remember that. And there was a lot of friction going on between my brother and my mum. There was an incident when we were there where he hurled a sherry bottle across the kitchen, narrowly missing Mum. Because he was enraged. He was full of rage and anger, wasn't he? I mean, why wouldn't he be? But one particular incident I remember at this place we were living, I woke up in the middle of the night, as kids do, I suppose, and my brother wasn't there because he was away at school, so there was just me and my mum. Oh, and I have to say, by this point, we'd moved. She'd left my dad. We'd moved to another village to another property to get away from him, and lo and behold, within, I don't know, 2-3 weeks, Dad shows up, moves in, we're back to square one. So I wake up and I can remember walking downstairs and there was no one there. Not a soul in the house. And I'm like, this had never happened to me in the sense that, I'd never sort of woken up and there was no one there. There was usually somebody there, like my mum or whatever. But there was no one there. And the overwhelming terror, the fear, the realisation, if you call it, when it kicked in, I thought I'd been abandoned. I thought, that they're not going to come and get me. That's it. They've gone away, So I screamed, apparently, and I screamed and I screamed and I screamed. And I screamed so loud that the neighbours next door, there were only like 2 cottages, and okay, I mean, they obviously heard me because they live next door. So the neighbour comes, bangs on the door, and I obviously opened the door was open. And anyway, he realised obviously that my parents had gone and left me, so he took me round to his. And whatever time, my parents rolled home, because they'd gone to the pub, obviously, that's, they were always at the pub. My dad lived in the pub every day. And then he'd come home and carry on drinking at home. But when my mum and dad arrived back at the house, pissed, obviously the next door neighbour comes out and starts going on about the fact that they've left me in the house. Anyway, my father punched him in the face and said, it's our daughter, give her back. So he just took me back, and that was it, end of, kind of thing. So that happened frequently, but that's one memory that I can vividly remember of actually sort of being left, and then of course it would have been all my fault. I mean, you see, the thing is, my dad was a charmer. When the police used to turn up, he'd open the door for him and he'd say, "Oh, officer, come in. Do come in, officer. Excuse my wife, she's a bit..." That's how it was. And as I say, the police used to advise my mum and say, just leave him, get out. And during the time that we were living at this second place, she was obviously, she'd walked out of a council house, and where we went secondly, it was private rent. And I remember her dragging me to the phone box, every night in the village, or every afternoon in the village, and ringing the council and saying, collapsing in floods of tears, saying, please, please give me a house. So we were living at this property, and I was going to the local school, and I used to have to catch a bus to get to the school. And I used to get off the bus, and there was people who know me will know, exactly where I'm talking about. But there was this there was this grave. It's still there now to this day, and there's always flowers on this grave. And as a kid, we were terrified of walking past this place. And I used to have to I used to have to get off the bus and walk to where I lived, which is 2 cottages in the middle of nowhere, on my own, past this grave. In winter, when it was dark, obviously, and I used to try and run as fast as I could. Oh dear. And the other vivid memories that I have living in that second home was, as I say, my brother was not very kind, and I don't say that as to knock him. I'm just telling the truth. This is my story. I'm telling it as it is. It's got to be told, and it's got to be told as it happened and as it is. And my brother was horrible. He was vicious. He was nasty. He used to make me stand while he used to shoot arrows at me and pellet guns, and I wore these awful massive sort of glasses. I mean, I can laugh about this now because it's hilarious now, but at the time obviously it wasn't. And I remember there was this one incident, and he told me to stand on the bonfire that was going. I mean, it wasn't a blazing bonfire, it was just sort of embers burning. Because we used to have fires in the garden. My dad was a gardener, and he had bonfires and stuff. Anyway, he used to call me Losh. That was my nickname, Losh. My brother used to call me Losh, and he'd go, "Stand on the bonfire, Losh." And I'd go, "No." And he'd go, "Stand on the bonfire." And I remember this one day, but we do laugh about it now, and have laughed about it since. He had this gun that fired these suction dart things, and he fired them, and he was firing them at my glasses. I mean, fortunately, the glasses didn't break and glass go in my eyes, but I remember having these, and of course him and his mates are absolutely howling. There's his little sister. Don't. And he'd say, if you tell Mum, I'll hit you. But you know what? I absolutely worshipped him. I adored him. It didn't matter how unkind he was to me. I loved him. I loved him then. I love him now. So, that just takes us up to, what, 9 years old? 8, 9 years old? We've got to, I think. So, as I say, Mum, would pluck up the courage to leave my father, and then he'd work his way back in, and I mean, obviously to us it was a relief when he wasn't there. But you see, the issue was it wasn't just my dad. It was my mum was drinking. She was down in the booze more and more and more and more, and she couldn't live without my father, but she couldn't live with him. I mean, when she left him, he went and usually got digs above a pub somewhere in town, and he'd be happy. He'd be propping the bar up and just crash out and fall asleep, and that would be the end of him. But I used to go and visit him when he wasn't living with us, but again he would try to play games. He would say, "Oh, tell your mother this," and then my mother would say, "I'll tell your father this when you see him," and so, as I say, she would leave him and then come back, and that was our life, really. And as I say, my brother gets kind of angry when I brought up the fact that, he went to school and I was, the fact that my brother went to school and I was left at home, and he said, "Oh yeah, because you say I got out of it." Well, he did, and I'm not saying he didn't suffer when he went to boarding school. He had his own set of problems to deal with, obviously, but that's I did bear the brunt of the anger, the cruel things that my mother used to say to me, and of course every child of every alcoholic parent has heard, "Oh well, it's all your fault. If it hadn't been for you, I wouldn't be drinking." Yeah, the same old excuses that they come out with. But that's just a little, that takes us up sort of to that's gone through. Oh, the other thing was that in the village that I lived in, when I was about 5 years old, there was a riding stables in the village, just a little riding stables. And my mum, obviously, I guess, thought, let's take Lucy for riding lessons. She probably just wanted to get me out from under her feet, I expect. And I think my brother went there as well for a bit. Yeah, he did. So she presented me to the woman at the riding school, and but I couldn't handle it. I couldn't pick it up. I couldn't even hold the reins properly. I don't know. Emotionally, I just couldn't cope with anything. So they tell me like 100 times, this is how you hold the reins, and I would hold it the opposite way. So my mum kind of took me away from the riding stables, and then a couple of years later I went back, and then from there I just took off. Horses were my life and never looked back. So that was a good thing that she did. She saved me in that respect, because once I got a good grasp of riding and realised that actually I could ride, and it was fun and it was an escape, I was there all the time. My mum also, funnily enough, she had all her kids christened. I think we were all christened because she'd always believed in God. So I was christened as a baby, and I know my brother was. Later on, she had me confirmed, but that's another story. Later on, but I was in the church choir. I remember that, and but it was hilarious because the vicar at the time of this little village church that we went to, was an alcoholic, and there were times we were in choir practice, and he'd be passed out drunk on one of the pews, and we'd all be giggling and tittering, taking the piss. And I think my mum reported him in the end, and I think he lost his job, and he was gone. But yes, I was in the choir, but stuff like at primary school, there was never, if you were involved in anything like sports day, or where your parents were invited to come and see you, my parents never turned up. They just weren't there. They weren't capable of there were lots of times they'd promise, And then you'd be sitting there going, oh, everybody else's parents turn up. And, nope, not mine. So, and I also remember, we used to take my brother, my dad would drive him back to school. And as I say, it was about 20 miles away from where we were living. And I remember dropping him off, at the school, and there'd be these little 5-year-olds, with their little shorts on. Who sends their kids to boarding school at 5 years old? I don't get it. I mean, my brother wasn't 5 when he went, but I mean, okay, you've got the money, but at 5 years old, I don't get it. I don't get it. But, maybe there are a lot of kids that are better off like that. And obviously for my brother, it was, it was what was best for him at the time. So, I guess we'll kind of leave it. This video is kind of 46 minutes long, and it's probably going to take 20 hours to upload. I had a nightmare the other day trying to upload the video. It was like something didn't want it to be uploaded, methinks, maybe. But we got it there eventually. So I think I'm going to wrap it up there. So that's kind of the ages that I was between, up to the age of sort of 9, and then I'll pick it up on the next videos when we moved again to a different house. So I'm going to show you. It's a bit grey now. And I guess I need to go back to, because it's kind of a 10-minute walk back home, to go and let the dogs out and sort them out. But it's a nice day, and I love it down here because you've got all the birds out there. But I do love it here. It's quiet. There's no one about. It's so hard sometimes these days to get away from people, and actually just get a spot where you can, just sit and talk, or just sit and think. So I think I'll call it a day on that one, and then we'll pick up on the next one, folks. Okay.